class of the day, and we have Christine Jarvie from Stitch and Run Quilts.
Hi, everybody. Okay, I will try this right here, but if I continually gag, you'll know why, okay? I don't like stuff on my neck. So, it is so good to see you. Are you having a blast? Yeah. Isn't it great to be together, to rub shoulders and be able to see each other? I'm so grateful to be here. I'm also grateful that it's cold today. Why? Because what do we do when it's cold? We sew, right? So the weather knew what we were doing today, and it said, I need to help these guys feel like they need to sew today, right? So welcome. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be asked. Thank you so much, Terry. And she said, if you don't know me, I'm Christine from Stitching Around Quilts. I'm just one of the owners. Linda Cower is the other owner. And we specialize in pre-cut, pre-fused laser applique. That is our niche, but of course, we do everything else as well, okay? So my big thing is, as I go through this, if you have any questions, no question is too little, too small, too off, you know? So if you have a question, or if I haven't phrased something right and you don't understand, please ask, okay? So always raise your hand. If I don't see you, the neighbor, shout her, you know, something, okay? So this class today is a lot of fundamental basics, okay? So some of these things you might be like, meh, I already know all this. Yeah, come on, get on with it, okay? So bear with me while we go through some of the very fundamental basics, because those are what builds a great quilt, right? And there's a few things that maybe you'll pick up on that you didn't know before, and you might really be interested in that, okay? So let's see, I got to look at my notes so I can remember where to start. I can blabber away. So where do you start when you want to start quilting? Where's the very beginning? Fabric, okay? Fabric. So obviously we need fabric to start a quilt. And what kind of fabric do we want to get? Good quality. Why do we call it quilt quality fabric? Okay. So, and why is quilt quality fabric so expensive? I get that all the time. Why can't I just buy it at Walmart? Okay. So I'm going to explain a few things in regards to that. Why we term it quilt quality fabric is because the mill mills it in a completely different way for us, okay? It starts with the dye. There's a better dye in quilt quality fabric. It starts with the actual fibers. The fibers of quilt quality fabric, how they're spun, are much better. It's called mercerized. When you see that on your thread, mercerized is a completely different technique where they embed the fibers in a solution, and that strengthens the bond of the fibers. So there's the dye, there's the fiber, there's how it's milled, there's the thread count of your quilt quality fabric, the weave of the fabric, okay? So all of these things make quilt quality fabric. So we need to start off. I feel for new quilters who are starting to get into quilting, and they think, well, I'm just going to test it out because I don't want to buy this expensive fabric if I don't like the skill, or if I don't, if I just want to test it. The problem with that is you will not have the same outcome as if you had worked with quilt quality fabric. And they get frustrated. They think that they're not good enough, that they don't have the skill level to do it, etc. And it kind of compounds on itself because they're not successful because of things that not quilt quality fabric can do to you. Okay, so because of a variety of things that you probably already all know, okay? So it all comes down to good quality fabric, good thread, good tools, okay? Good quality tools. There's basically 4 tools that you start with, just 4. You can adapt to all of this other stuff and everything else, okay? So good fabric, a good ruler, a good mat, and a good rotary cutter, right? So you've got to have a good mat to cut good quality fabric, and a good ruler, whichever one you like or prefer. I would start out with a nice 6x24 because that will cut you the width of your fabric. So I think this is the first ruler that you should always buy, okay? And of course, a rotary cutter. You've got to have a good rotary cutter. And we're going to talk about cutting skills, so I won't get into that yet. But if you have these 4 basic tools, you will be successful. You will have a chance to build your skills, and you will have the outcome that you desire if you start out with good basics. Now, all of these things, the mat, the ruler, the rotary cutter, you can buy these very cheaply online from Wish and several other places. They are not, if they're not a name brand that you know, like Fisker or On the Grid or some of those brands, if it's an off brand, it's made for crafting, okay? It's made for crafting, it is not made for quilting. So be very careful when you do that, because the rulers their lines can be off, etc., and it can go down the line from there. So be careful that you're purchasing name brand items for quilting, ones that you recognize. If you don't know what to purchase, ask friends, ask other quilters, ask quilt shops. They will always have a good suggestion for you. Okay? So any questions on that beginning part?
You're doing great.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the 3 very basic, very fundamental levels of quilting or techniques of quilting that you got to get down. These fundamental skills will make you perfect. They really will. Okay? So let's talk about cutting. You have to have good cutting skills. You have to be able to sew a straight seam, right? We're going to talk about that because that can be tricky, even though it sounds like it would be so easy, right? Just sew a straight seam. But okay, so we'll talk about sewing a straight seam, and then ironing. You've got to have a really good ironing technique. What do we say? Right? No squishing allowed. Okay? All right. So let's talk about basic cutting techniques first. So let's talk about good form. What are some of your ideas of what good form for cutting would be?
Accurate.
What's that?
Accurate.
Accurate cutting, okay? But what enables you to cut accurately?
I taught some people and they were really cutting toward themselves and it was not working. And so then they back and forth. I'm like, ah.
Yes. When I see that, I'm like,
Sharp.
absolutely. Sharp blade,
Right height table.
never backwards, right height of table. Great suggestions. Is this a good table?
No.
No.
We're turning down.
Maybe. I've seen a lot worse. My cutting table at work is a lot worse than this. Good thing I don't cut fabric on it to actually, make piecing. So let's talk about, those are all great ideas. So good form starts with a table at the right height, okay? So what's the right height? Would this table be the right height for me?
No.
After about 5 minutes, right? Your back will start hurting if you don't have a table at the right height. The right height of table that you should be cutting at is about 4 inches below a 90, just slightly angled 90-degree on your arm, okay? So just a barely slight angle. So about 4 inches from here, okay? That is the appropriate height for a cutting table. And then once you have the appropriate height, how do you handle your rotary cutter?
Closed until you're ready to cut.
Are you going to do this? Should you be just grasping it just as hard as you possibly can to get through that fabric? Okay, your rotary cutter should melt your fabric like butter. Okay? You should not have any trouble with the motion. So what you do is you'll have your mat here, okay, and your nice ruler. And once you get your fabric laid out and lined up how you like it, stand in front of your mat so that your arm is even with just the outside of the ruler where you're going to put your rotary blade, okay? So this side of your body, whoops, I need to send that flying for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Don't do that. So and then if you're right-handed, stand with your left foot just a little bit forward, okay?
How's the arm? About, okay.
So just about right here in line with the outside of your ruler. So as you go to cut, you can get one fluid motion forward, okay? So one fluid motion, and what you do is as you start to cut, you start off of the fabric, okay? So you start at the very beginning of your mat or wherever your fabric is. You start before the fabric. So don't start right at the edge of your fabric, start before it. And when you start before it, then line up your rotary cutter right before your fabric in one fluid motion. And notice how I rock forward. So it's one fluid motion as I change my weight from my right leg to my left leg, or vice versa if you're going to cut left-handed. And you can change your blade. If you're left-handed, these go both ways. If you're left-handed, change your blade to the other side so that the blade hits right against, even perpendicular with the ruler, okay? So this I see some is this, cutting, so they'll be cutting, they got their elbow winging out here, and they'll be cutting against the ruler, and it makes the blade, instead of perfectly perpendicular, it'll be winged out here, okay? And when you're doing that, there's no way for the blade to stay, see this? There's no way for the blade to stay perpendicular when you got your wing, your arm flopping out here, okay? So make sure to just have, and a lot of people ask me, well, how do you keep the ruler from wobbling around, right? So the important thing about that is make sure that the pressure from your hand, and I always use my hand splayed out like this on top of the ruler, okay? And then I put my pinky finger on the edge, down onto the fabric. So I put my pinky finger right here on the edge, but I have big hands, so I can do that. But there's a couple things that when you do that, if you put your pinky finger over here, it makes your hand farther over, so it's less likely to get cut. Okay, so again, your left foot forward, one fluid motion, never pull back. Okay, never pull back on your rotary cutter. You cannot keep the motion, you can't rock backwards and keep the motion even and straight and your blade perpendicular. You'll tend to wonk out because you're rocking back and you'll pulling your arm back, okay? Any questions about that? You're all so good, you know everything.
Well, we're all trying to think, what do I do?
Okay,
How often?
yes.
How often should you change your blade?
Okay, that's a lot. A lot. We get stuck in the rut of, I'll change it next time. Anytime that you feel like you're having to grip your, anytime you feel like you're really clenching at your rotary cutter or having to really push down hard, even medium hard, you've got to change your blade. It should be a very easy, fluid. You should be able to easily cut several layers of fabric with your rotary cutter. Okay? Yes.
Are those blade sharpeners worth buying?
Go ahead.
When you say several layers, how many layers?
6.
Okay.
Mhm. You should be able, with a very good, nice sharp blade, be able to cut 6 layers. And back to your question, remind me what it was?
Those blade sharpeners.
Oh, the blade sharpeners, they work, but I don't think they sharpen them like a new blade would be sharpened. What, anybody else, your opinion about blade sharpeners?
I've tried 2 or 3, 4 different brands, electric one and hand ones. I've never got an edge that was anywhere close to new ones.
Right.
But I have bought blades online that are second, not like name
Mhm.
brand blades. And I've actually had some really good luck with a lot of the new non-name brand ones.
Okay, so that's good to know because whenever I've heard of buying secondhand,
Not name brand.
not name brand, yeah, they've had divots and different things, and so it hasn't been as productive. So
Just read the reviews, that's all I do.
yeah, there you go. Yeah. So go ahead.
You're trying to say that if you spread out your hand, it's enough to hold that on there.
Let me go back to that. Okay. I think was there another question?
Yeah, one of our friends up there bought titanium blades. Are they the best ones to buy?
It completely depends on, yes, they can have their function, and they will last longer. They will, but they are more expensive, so it kind of depends on, I think in the end, you'll spend the same amount because with a regular blade, you'll have to buy 2 or 3 at the time that you buy the one titanium one that costs what 2 or 3 cost. So you just have to know when it needs changed and change it. You have to make yourself change it, okay? And I'm going to tell you why, because there's a couple things with cutting accurately that if you don't have a nice, clean, crisp cut, it changes everything for you, okay? Was there any other questions?
Would you be disposed if you used one?
I clip it in the old case and throw it away in the old case. Anybody else? Any other ideas?
Can of food, an old food can.
Oh, that's a good idea. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just cover them with masking tape.
Oh, yeah.
Masking tape.
Mhm.
around it.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to, if I buy some that are like a 5-pack, I tend to put the old one on the bottom, pull off the new one, and I rotate it like that. And then I have to look at it really hard to figure out if I've used all 5. So, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Mark one case old. I do that with my needles because I have several little things of needles between denim or 90 or 80 or, my applique needles, stuff like that. I'll mark one case old and I'll put the used ones in that one and then I'll know that way.
Just mark the blades that you use.
Yeah, you can do that too, for sure. Yeah.
I got this little plastic container, I don't know what was in it, and it's my own little sharps thing, and I put a little cutting the lid.
Uh-huh.
And so I could just slide the stuff in there like
Yeah.
pins and my old blades.
Old pins and blades and the pin that you should have hit with your needle, but you did.
Old needles.
What's that?
Back to cutting.
Yes.
So I'm cutting and I cut and I'm doing great. It's going straight, but I've gone maybe 6 inches and then I look and I'm off.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? What's causing that besides me being, because I try everything.
So cutting is probably well, I don't know if it's the most important thing that you can master, but it is critical to master cutting. So let me go back to cutting a little bit. So the important thing when you have your hand on your ruler is that you are pressing down, okay? So as you go to make that cut, you're pressing down, and as you rotate from your right to your left, make sure you're not pushing that. You want to keep your hand firmly directed downward, you know, your body weight downward, and you're not rocking that ruler or pushing that ruler forward, okay? And if you have your body in position, you will find that the cutting is much easier. Because if it's over here, if your ruler is over here on this side of your body and you're trying to cut at this angle, right? Then you're pushing this way. So you need to make sure that you're aligned right with your blade to just be able to push out. It's also important how you how you grip your rotary cutter, okay? It needs to be comfortable. So whatever rotary cutter you use, it needs to be comfortable. You can hold it like this, just in your fist. You can hold it with your thumb. Some people hold it with their pointer finger, like this. Whatever way is comfortable that you can do it relaxed and it just is one fluid motion for you, that's what's right for you, okay? So one fluid motion, and don't clench it like, you're gonna have a war with it. And let's see, what else about that? There are a couple other things, let me look. Yes.
I was watching something on YouTube or something not too long ago, and my hands aren't very big, so it's hard to. And I had the ruler. She would put a 5-pound.
Yes, I was just gonna say
and
that.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
It works and off. Yep, off the cutting thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
The other thing, many times will use the suction hand holder.
Yes,
and
very
that works
good.
really well.
Mhm.
It works.
Yeah, so both of those things are great techniques, okay? So you can use something heavy on the end of your ruler, okay, to keep that ruler down. So it can be the 5-pound weight that you see a lot of people use. It can be a jar of spaghetti sauce. It can be a 5-pound bag of rice. It can be whatever, works for you, okay? So, and that will keep it so that the end of this ruler, as you go to cut towards the end of your fabric, that it doesn't go this way. A lot of times that's what happens is your ruler goes this way and you follow it right along. And part of that is because the height of your table may not be right for you, okay? So you're kind of stretching to finish that cut. And in the process of stretching, all the rest of it kind of goes wonky. And you end up either veering off this way or pushing your ruler the opposite direction, or not keeping it where it's supposed to be. The other thing is some people, you can buy some coating for your ruler. You can buy rulers that have coating on them. My staff at my shop love the coated rulers. I always flip it over. I cannot stand a coated ruler. Okay? I am always, and probably because I'm always adjusting my ruler. Okay? And sometimes that's okay, but I have to be careful when I'm adjusting my ruler to remember that when I'm cutting my pieces, I really shouldn't be moving my ruler around on top of my fabric, okay? So I have to be careful and remind myself that I really need to be picking up my ruler. So it doesn't matter if it's got grippy on it or not, other than when you go to cut, okay? If you have problem keeping your ruler in the right spot, then the frosted or the stuff that you can put on. One thing, I don't like sandpaper on my ruler or those little grippy pads because I feel like there's too much volume. Does that make sense? There's too much volume under my ruler, and I feel like my ruler can wobble a little bit on me. So look at this hack. What's this?
Tape.
Medical tape. So it's just a little bit thicker than, like Scotch tape or something like that. And you can just use a little piece of this on wherever part of the ruler is causing you problems, and it doesn't give you that, it's not unstable, and will help you keep your ruler where it's supposed to be.
Is it sticky on both sides?
Just one.
And how do you?
It's got a little bit of a texture or grain to it, and it just keeps the fabric keeps your ruler from moving without
So you put
being.
the sticky side to the ruler.
Yes, you put the sticky side to the ruler. Yeah. What else? Let's see. Did that answer your question about how?
Yeah, that's what I use, is that.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions? Let me look at mine. Oh, I want to talk to you about something about cutting too. So we talked about our 90-degree angle and about 4 inches. We talked about pressing or going forward and not back. Weight on the end and the sticky. Okay, so let's talk about this for a sec. How critical is it to have a good mat? Very? Okay, what about if you've had your mat and it's got that nice groove in it? Okay, definitely get rid of it. What happens to your fabric when you're cutting in that groove? Yeah, you're not going to get a true cut. Your rotary blade should be on top of your mat. You should be cutting on top of it. You shouldn't have to press so hard that you're going into that, I call it the valley of doom. Okay? Because even though it's just that little smidge, really, what's happening is your fabric is caving into that valley, right? And so it's distorting your fabric. And you're cutting in that groove. So number one, that's going to change your dimensions, right? But it's also going to distort your fabric in the weave because you're not getting you're cutting it, but you're not getting a nice, even cut. It can make it so that your fabric pushes forward. And so you're going to get some wavy, how did I describe that? If you're pushing your fabric and you're not really cutting it with a nice clean, your fabric can end up with this kind of wave to it after you've finished cutting it. Instead of it being a nice, clean line, you've distorted your fabric by trying to cut it in that valley, and it throws off your dimensions, it throws off the fabric, the weave, everything. The other thing is sometimes if you don't have a nice sharp blade, when you're trimming your blocks and you come to your seams that are nested, etc., when you go to cut over that and you notice if you're pushing your fabric, if it's not cutting just right across that nice and crisp and clean, you need to change your blade, because if you're pushing and that fabric's moving on you, or you feel like you've got to roll up over it to get it cut, you need to change your blade, because you need to just, that fabric needs to stay nice and even. You don't want to push that fabric to get your blade up and over it. You should just cut nice. Okay?
Christine, I
Yes.
wish I had stock in those blades.
Right?
They're
Yes.
so expensive.
Yeah.
I got you.
Let's take out a new company and make it be cheap. Okay. Okay, let's see. The one thing to note, some people say not to change sewing machines in quilts, because not to sew on one and then sew on another. Why would that be? Right? So your seam allowance, if you're working between machines, can be different. It can be just ever so off. So be careful with that. If you want to do that, if you have like a travel version of a sewing machine and the nice one at home that you don't want to haul out and do anything with, you can test those seam allowances and make sure that they're the same. Okay? What about rulers? Do you have to use the exact same ruler or the exact same company of rulers? Okay, so the key to that is to know your ruler. Okay?
Say that again.
So to know your ruler or your rulers. So this ruler, the lines are just one little line, right? The OmniGrid have the little sort of yellow ovals sort of around it, right? And other rulers have other stuff. So the key to your ruler is knowing where that center is of the lines on your ruler. So you can interchange rulers, but you make sure that you know where your center is or where you're measuring from. And I personally would be careful interchanging rulers, because even though you think you know your ruler, they could be a little bit different. They could be a little bit off, you know. Go ahead.
Sometimes I use my mat to measure, and then sometimes I use my ruler to measure, and they're not always the same.
I'm guilty of that as well. Yep. Yes.
So what are you saying, like, do some people, like when they are putting their fabric down to cut, they go on the other side of that line or
Mhm.
on the inside of that line?
Yes. So say this is one ruler, okay? Say this is the OmniGrid ruler, and it has a little bit of a circle around it, okay? On all the lines. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or like the Olfa ruler, it just has one straight slit, okay? So you want to be right here, right? Right in the middle. Well, sometimes if you're measuring from here, it can be difficult to see this middle line. But if you're used to it and you know, and you're consistent with it, it's great. It's a great ruler. It's even. It's just you've got to pay attention to what you're doing with your rulers to make sure that you're cutting consistently. What else? Any questions on that? Let's see. Where are we? Okay. One thing to make sure too is once you start your cut, don't mistakenly think about halfway through, okay, I'm finished. Whoop. You know, make sure you stay focused on the fact that you're using good technique all the way through your cut. Don't think, okay, I've got that far, now I'm finished. Okay, so Stay focused on the cut itself. Any questions about cutting accurately?
I just think you should stay focused on where your fingers are too at all times. Like if somebody walks into the room or you hear a sound, I sliced my finger because I got distracted. I looked up at somebody doing something and I was like, no, when you're cutting, and that is all you're doing. And if you need to stop, stop, but don't cut blindly.
Great idea. And number 1 rule, never leave the blade open. That's why I love these, because when you release the handle, I had others at the shop and I had to buy these because my employees left the blade open, and I picked it up with an open blade because at home I never have an open blade. Okay, so make sure always to close your blade, and if you have littles around, hide these. And make sure you lock it, because they can do really good damage. Right? Your couch, the dog. Yep. Okay. We good on cutting? Okay, let's talk about sewing a straight line. That's gotta be as easy as it gets, right?
Not so.
Okay, let's talk about the very beginning steps of being able to sew a straight line. What would be the first thing that you'd want to do?
Know your mark.
Measure your distance from your needle to your line.
Okay, even before that, that's very good. Great, I heard it. Where was it? Who said it? New needle? Yep, new needle. Okay, so the rule of thumb with needles is about every 8 hours. Unbelievably. Now, if you buy titanium or some of the others, they will last longer, but a new needle for sure. If you're sewing and your machine sounds thunk, 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 it should be just you shouldn't hear that needle piercing your fabric at all, ever. Okay, so make sure that you have a new needle. They're not that expensive. You can spare that. Okay, you'll be so much happier. And clean your machine. Okay, you would be surprised, even though you think, oh, I've only sewn for a couple of hours. It can't, that little project, it didn't. Well, the problem is you forgot that before that you had another little project, and then before that you finished that other great big project. Just rule of thumb, when you start a new project, clean your machine. Okay? Do we use compressed air? Don't use compressed air, okay, to clean the machine. When you use compressed air to clean the machine, compressed air has moisture in it. Not only are you forcing the fibers that are inside your machine to embed into the mechanics of your machine, that moisture is getting up inside there as well. So compressed air is not the option. Just use your little cleaning brushes to clean out the lint in your feed dogs, especially up underneath your bobbin. As much as you can clean your machine, put a new needle in, and you're nice and ready to go. Okay? And test your seam allowance. Okay? Make sure that you've got a good seam allowance. Your machines can shimmy and adjust and change. So make sure you have a good seam allowance. Quilting is done with a 1/4 inch seam, right? Okay, yeah. I get people who say, well, I'm a seamstress. I want to sew with a 5/8. It's not going to work. You're going to have to convert some serious math. Okay, well, that's not a big enough seam. It's going to pull out. I promise you, it will not pull out. It will be perfect. 1/4 inch seam. Okay. And how about a guide? What kind of guides can you use to achieve that lines so that you're feeding your fabric in and getting an even seam.
Well, there's usually one that comes with your machine, an
Okay.
attachment, so,
1/4 inch foot,
yes.
right?
So,
So 1/4 inch foot, whether that's a mark on the foot or the bar that comes along the side, okay? So that can help you. What else can help you? Yep, you can put the seam tape on your machine so that you're focused not right at the needle. Because if you're looking just right here, if you're over here with your fabric and you're pushing it up to meet that guide by your needle, then you're distorting your fabric before you get it even to the needle, right? So you can use a seam, the seam tape. What about, have any of you tried painter's tape? So you can put several layers of painter's tape together in a strip, line it up at that perfect 1/4 inch seam. If you need to use a ruler, you know, and then when you have several layers of this, then your fabric can ride right up against that little layer of tape, right? So the key is especially with bigger blocks, the weight of your fabric is over here, right? And you have just that tiny little bit on this side that you're trying to sew together. So you got to be careful that this isn't draped over. That's why you like a flat deck, if you can. But also, if you can keep that fabric riding and not draped over, and riding right up against your guide, then you will sew a straight seam. What happens when you have a seam, when you take it out, here's your fabric, okay? Oh. Can you see that? Here's your piece of fabric, and you pull it out, and your seam looks like this. It's perfect, it looks good, and then, oh!
That's how I sew.
Is there a problem?
Sometimes you think, well, it'll iron, you know, and you'll get it. But what's wrong with that idea that, well, it's stitched right here and over here, so when I go to iron it, it'll just even out. You'll have this wavy, right? And wavy over here, and your seam won't lay nice and crisp and even. So you really need to make sure that you train yourself with whatever you need, whether it's the masking tape, or if you can do it with your 1/4 inch foot, whatever it is, if you can do it with that and achieve a nice, straight, even line, you are good. Okay? But what happens with the very beginning? Right? That dang little piece, and it gets sucked down into the feed dogs, and then it's all mangled and, you know? What's that? Okay. Or there are so many names for this. You need a leader, a tiger, a header, a spider, whatever you want to call it, okay, in front of your block that you're starting to sew, okay? And if you put that in front of your block, and way back when, I didn't know, why did you do that? I just hold on to my threads and away I go, you know? Why do you want that leader, header, spider, whatever it is, in front of your block?
It's not pulling all your fabric together, and then you have to pick it, and it's stretched. And when I was doing masks, one of them said, start using those. And I just started doing that last year.
Uh-huh.
And it actually works really slick.
Yes, it's great. So that's great, okay? Why else?
Well, you're pulling on your thread, so it's stretching. Is that what she said? Pulling to hold the thread, and it kind of stretches it and doesn't make it go through even at the 1/4 of an inch to start at the first.
Okay, good idea. And then
Save on thread, because you're not pulling it out and cutting it, pulling it out and cutting every single piece.
I'm terrible with that. I'm really terrible with that. I'm a tailor. Stretch it out.
They called it a charger.
Okay,
Oh,
I've
Yeah.
heard that before. That's
so
what it's called.
what this does, when you use a charger, a spider, a tiger, a header, a leader, or whatever, that little scrap of fabric, right? It doesn't have to, it can just be a little tiny scrap of fabric. What that does is it engages your thread and your feed dogs, and it grasps the thread, or it bites the thread, okay? So that you have the right tension already set before you start to feed in your fabric for your block. And if you do, go ahead.
I start with the seam, I'll start down, put my needle in a 1/4 inch, and then back tack.
Back tack, mm-hmm.
And it works the same, plus it gives the seams some strength.
That's a good method too. Yeah, great idea.
What causes it to do when you're halfway down the seam?
Tension.
Tension?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, tension. If you're getting that goobery nest of thread in the back underneath, your tension is off on your.
I just wondered because when I was doing some, it was just like it grabbed like about, 4 or 5 inches or so, and wadded it all underneath. And from that was for the top part.
More than likely tension. The other thing it can be that issue happens with is how you've wound your bobbin. Okay, so be careful with how you wind your bobbin. If it doesn't look right, sorry, but you're going to have to unwind it and start over, right? And the other thing is good thread. I cannot stress enough about good thread. Coats and Clark, sorry, I said it. I try not to do that, but cheaper thread is not going to accomplish the same results, okay? Thread, good quality thread will save your machine, like because thread has fibers on it, okay? So you'll have thread like this, and it will have these bits of fiber coming off of it like this. That's where the lint comes from, mostly inside your machine, is the thread, okay? So you want a good quality thread that has very few fibers coming off of it. And if you use good quality thread, you also have better tension results. Okay, it won't break on you. It'll wind better on your bobbin. It'll sew better for you. You have less nesting issues on the back.
Another issue that it might be is if she's changed her needle recently, it may have not been seated all the way up, or the needle may have not been taken out and changed in a long time, and it could have worked loose.
True.
It could be coming down.
The other thing too is your machine, that what's it called, the bar, the bar that your needle goes up in, that can vibrate a little bit loose. So when you take your machine in to get it serviced and stuff like that, they're working on that type of stuff that you wouldn't notice. That shaft can move down, it can vibrate down, it can get loose, and your needle can be in the wrong position, all that kind of stuff. So you need to get your machine serviced. I service mine a couple times a year. So, yes.
Back to thread, how do you know what is a good quality thread then?
Expensive. No, everybody really does have their preference to good thread.
Okay, do you always use 100% cotton or cotton polyester? What's the best?
Yes.
Tiny you sell.
We sell Arthil and Glide. We use Arthil. I am a 100% cotton fan, so I like 100% cotton thread when I am piecing. I like 50 weight. That's a nice 50 weight piece, piecing thread. I love Arthil. I used to use some other kinds, well-known kinds, but Superior is a great thread. Mettler, I used to sew with Mettler. It is now owned by Coats and Clark. And I feel like personally that the quality is not quite there like what it used to be.
What about Gutermann?
Gutermann could be, Gutermann's good. I think it's a medium. Mhm.
What fly?
The 50 weight? Yeah. 50 weight. You want to use 50 weight for piecing. If you want a less bulk, you can go smaller, like 80 weight. The 80 weight is a very thin, very fine thread. So that is if you're making a masterpiece, okay, and you want everything absolutely, you don't want your thread to take up any of your seam allowance. Okay, so 80 weight thread can be used, you just have to be very careful with it. So the rule of thumb for piecing is 50 weight. The rule of thumb for embroidery and applique, etc., is 40 weight. 40 weight is just a little bit thicker. It gives just a little bit more, it pops a little bit more. And a lot of so 40 weight thread for applique usually has some sheen or shine to it to make it look a little, but you do not have to applique with 40 weight. You can also applique with 50 weight standard thread.
How about for quilting?
When you do free motion or your long arm, same. You can use either of those. If you are hand quilting, because your stitches are generally bigger, if you're hand quilting it, I would suggest hand quilting thread. It's a little bit heavier. And if you're doing some things like making yo-yos or something like that where you're going to gather it or pull on it, hand quilting thread works really good for that. Or you can double 50 weight thread. If you are a hand binder, you can use 50 weight thread where you double it and bind with 50 weight thread. Terry, how long am I supposed to go? Okay, I got to talk a lot faster. Any questions about, let's see. Let's not forget this. So your seam has a beginning, a middle, and an end, okay? We're really careful here because we want to feed it in right so that it starts with an accurate 1/4 inch seam. We don't want it to go into the feed dog. That's why we use the spider head or tiger, whatever. Okay, here. And then we're going to use a guide so that we get a nice even stitch along here. I should have erased that, sorry. What about when we get down here at the end? Oh, I'm done. Have you ever noticed when you're, I get irritated because I'm being so careful, and then I pull it out and I finish, and I'm like, come on, I was so careful. Okay, when your fabric gets to the end down here, the feed dogs will pick it up a little bit more, okay? So it tends to lift the fabric under your foot. So at the very end of the piece that you're piecing, it'll lift it and it'll tweak it over, okay? Just about every machine will do that. So, and I have big hands thanks to my dad, okay? So my fingers are too big to hang on to that little tiny lip before it gets to the thread. But, I mean, to the end of my piece. But not only that, don't quilt yourself into your quilt, okay? So I love these because they're really pointy on the end and I can get right up close to the very, you can hold on to it if you want. The only thing I hate about these is why did they put that little sharp point right there? Because inevitably I'll be working and I'll squish them together and that point will get me in my finger, like I've been poked with a needle. So you can use tweezers. The purple thing, right? The purple thing. Whoever come up with the purple thing, this is great because you can use the tip just to hang on to it as it finishes.
So I'm just a little confused. So are you saying that because this is what happens to me a lot. It ends up being a little wider at the end. Is that what you're saying? So
because the feed dogs will take your piece that you're sewing, and as you get down here, it will lift it and pull it away. Okay? So it can, either or, it can pull it this way or it can pull it this way. So you can end up with it too narrow or you can end up with it too wide. Generally mine's too wide because I'm like, oh, I gotta push it, a little bit. So
Why can't you use a charger or spider or whatever you call it on the end of it?
you definitely could do that as well.
Or chain piece.
Oh, what's that?
Chain piece.
Yes, chain piece works great too. Does everybody know what chain piecing is? When you have one block and you feed another one in, that's a much more efficient way rather than just doing one, take it out, doing another, sewing another piece, sewing another piece. Saves on thread too, okay? I'm guilty of not chain piecing when I'm trying to make sure I have my blocks in the right order. Because sometimes when I'm chain piecing, I lose my order of how they're all supposed to go. What's a great way to make sure you don't lose your order so that you can still chain piece and be more efficient at your piecing?
Take a picture on
Woohoo! Take a picture, right? Take a picture on your phone. That way, we all have them, right? So take a picture so you can keep the order right, and then you can go back to it. The only thing is mine fades out. I'm always trying to bring up the picture again. So, but that's a great tip, is to use your phone to take a picture. Okay, let's see. Got to get to a couple other things here. You can use a chopstick, a cuticle stick, any little pointed thing to keep that little edge down as you finish off. Okay. What's that?
Call it a stiletto.
Yes, a stiletto. You can have one of those pointed stilettos with a bigger handle. Yep. Yeah. Okay, let's talk. Okay, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I like to back stitch a couple stitches at the end so that when I go sewing it, the seam has it come undone a quarter of an inch.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, that's a really good point. Because it's really frustrating if you're piecing your blocks and it's come apart. Yeah. Let's talk ironing really quick. Good ironing technique is key. You have to have a good ironing technique. So I have to chuckle sometimes because I'll be in the shop and I'll say press, and I hope this customer's not listening. I was teaching her how to do something, and I always use my hand and I say press, press, press. Okay? Well, she came back and she said, I pressed and pressed and pressed, but I just couldn't get it to work. I'm like, oh, press with your iron, you know? You gotta use your iron. You know, you can't get away with pressing without using your iron. Okay, so press with your iron. So I really try hard now to say, with your iron, press, you know, okay? So do you have to have a super expensive iron? They're nice. They're a great feature, but it's not a must, okay? Like your sewing machine, do you have to have a super expensive $20,000 machine? Nice, has great bells and whistles, can be fun to play with, do all kinds of stuff.
It has to work properly, no matter what machine you have. If it's not working properly, you're gonna quit sewing.
Yep, I totally agree. I have two machines. One is, it's not expensive, but it has more bells and whistles, I'll just say, than my other one. My other one's a $350 machine. It is a workhorse. I love it. I go to it all the time. Has no bells and whistles, but it will do anything I ask it to. Between threads, fabrics, techniques, applique, whatever I ask it to do, monopoly in both the top and the bobbin, it does everything. So that's it works, right? It's my go-to. This one just sits there. You know? So so with irons, you don't have to have an expensive one, but you have to have a good technique. Good technique means you press straight down, and then after you have set your seam, why is setting your seam so important?
It relaxes the thread and lets you wrap it around, so it flattens it good and doesn't bulk up your seam.
Okay. What else? Flattens your thread. It embeds the thread into your fabric and kind of, you could say, makes it be one. Okay. So setting your seam is critical in embedding your thread, but it also, when you set your seam, when you heat up your fabric and it relaxes the fabric when it's warm, the fibers relax and get soft, okay? That's why it's so critical, no squishing, no pressing back and forth, etc. Those fibers are nice and soft and very pliable when they're warm. So when you set the seam, you embed the thread and then you get it ready to press over, okay? When you press over, how many piano players do we have? Great, I just started taking lessons in October. When you press, try very hard when you roll over your fabric and you roll over your seam to play the piano on your seam, okay? Don't push it, just roll the edge over and your fabric, you know, the top over, and just play the piano just a little bit with your fabric while it's warm before you press straight down. And you will have a perfect, beautiful seam. Okay?
How about a wool pressing mask?
Love, 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 love them. Absolutely. They press from the bottom and the top. I used to be a steamer. I'm not a big steam fan. I used to love Best Press, and I still do when I finish my block. I will press it with starch or a sizing medium of some kind, whichever one is your favorite. Okay, but I love the wool mat because I can have it right here by me, you know, so I can press all my little pieces and have them just so nice and crisp and beautiful. And that block lays just wonderfully. I highly recommend wool mats. The thing about wool mat too is be careful if your iron starts to get a black edge around it from the wool mat, your iron is too hot on the mat. Okay, so if you're sort of getting this little black melty edge, your iron's too hot on it. Okay, I think we're gonna finish, but I will stay for a little bit if you have questions. There's stuff we didn't get to, so if you wanna come up and talk to me or ask questions, okay?
I know that some people had to leave at 3:30, so that's kind of, you're welcome to be excused. Don't worry about it. If you want to stay and ask Christine questions, great. There have also been a lot of questions about the anniversary quilt here. If you want to hear, it was made in 2001. If you already know about it, great. If you want to hear more about it, then when Christine's done, you can gather here and I will tell you about the anniversary quilt. Okay? So we'll have a little mini class for that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.